Welcome to the Bank Marketing Show, the podcast that engages and informs you for success in today's marketplace. It's the show that will make you a better marketer with trends, tactics, and inspiration from experts and industry leaders. If you're wanting to impact your personal success and position your bank as the best choice in your market, you're in the right place. Now let's dive into today's show with your hosts, Chris and Dan.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Bank Marketing Show. We're glad to have you with us today. We've got a great episode in line for you that Dan and I think we know actually is going to be really valuable for and applicable for every bank, whether you're an executive, marketing, whatever your role is. We're going to cover some really important things today around brand voice, what that means, who's responsible for it, how you determine it, and then what happens with it. That it regardless of where you are in that process as a bank, is going to be really valuable for you today. So, Dan, glad to see you, man. Excited about diving into this one.
Likewise. I harp on this stuff a lot. So I'm excited to kind of lay it out and go through it here. And like you're saying, I think for any bank, right, whether you're the, kind of $30 million one location bank in a small area or, multi-billion dollar, like every bank needs to develop their brand voice and put some focus on it. So,
yep,
super important stuff.
And I think one of the great things that we're going to go through for our listeners today, Dan, is that we've got 5 specific areas. So you're going to have some great takeaways from today's episode. We've got 5 specific areas to go through that are actually going to help you with determining an implementation. And then at the end of the episode today, too, we've actually got a voice and style guidelines piece, and we're going to tell you how we're going to toss that to anybody that wants it. So we'll dive in, Dan.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it probably makes sense to start out and talk about what is brand voice? How do we define what that is? That term is used a lot. And I think it probably, I know we probably have a different perspective as marketers on it, but I think it loses its meaning when it's used so much. So I'll throw out my sort of the way I think about it. And that's, your brand voice is really the way that your brand, your bank, your name, your tagline, your logo, all those things, the words you use, the colors, how all those things appear to somebody outside the bank, right? What is if you were to describe your bank as a friend, what kind of words would you use? Yeah, I don't know. How do you think about it?
Yeah, I like that very much. It's or you move to town and you bump into somebody on the street. And you go, hey, I'm looking for a local bank, and I see this one. Tell me about that. Tell me about that bank. Well, it's not about the color of the bricks or the layout of the lobby or it's not even necessarily about the products and services. The response that's going to be is, oh, that's a bunch of great folks. They are community involved. They are this, they are that, and so generally that ask a friend, like you say, or bump into someone in the community and ask them about you. The response is going to be reflective of the brand. Just like several episodes back, Dan, we had the authors for Think Like a Brand, Not a Bank. And man, what a cool one that was, because they dove all the way into discussion about this. But I think that was part of what it was, is how do you reflect, as you say, to your market, to your audience?
If you think about some of the, take like some of the biggest banks that probably everybody has heard of, but even just thinking about their logo, the brand voice goes way beyond logo, and we'll get into that. But even just thinking about, the logos, you picture like the Wells Fargo logo, and you picture the Bank of America logo, and you picture, Live Oak Bank, and you compare to credit unions, let's say, right, who tend to have a friendlier, more
kind of wider. Yeah.
Yeah, so, and there's nothing, there's pros and cons of all of it, right? But, some banks, some credit unions use, bright pinks and yellows and those types of things, and lowercase letters and, more modern fonts versus, Wells Fargo that's got like, what is it? It's like the horse,
Yeah,
and
like a
all
stagecoach
capital
or a horse or
letters
something.
and
Yeah.
red and gold that are like, color combos that have been around a long time. So, but you can already, even if you're not a marketer, even if you're not a creative, artist type of person, you get a different feel from those things. And like I said, there's no right or wrong with it. It's just more about how do you want your bank to come across.
Yeah.
There's a competitive aspect of it as well. Of if all my competitors are full capital letters and old school things, and we are that too, like, do we stand out or do we just look like them? Should we do something different to stand out?
And Dan, I've heard it described before that when you're talking about brand as a corporate brand, that the logo is actually 6 to 9% of what the brand is about. And, I think there's some validity to that, because that's straight where people, we redesigned our logo a few years ago. Okay, but who are you? You get into messaging and audience and all these other things that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, that are really what the brand is.
Do you start your Facebook post with hey, we're here to help and we love our customers? Or do you start them with, as a community financial institution,
There
we
you
offer
go.
a wide variety of checking accounts? Like there's you're all talking about the same thing, but just there's a lot more to than just the logo.
That's right. And before we started recording for this episode, you and I were talking about this, and out of all of the community bank clients that your agency and mine work with, so many of them are, in towns and they're across the street from each other, and they've been kind of duking it out in semi-friendly fashion for, a couple of generations for market share. And, so the question current day as marketers is what's the brand, what's the differentiation?
Yeah.
What is it that's setting you apart? And why are either a small business or an individual or whatever the case may be, whether it's loans or deposit accounts, et cetera, why are they going to choose you over the other?
Right.
And more relevantly in today's industries, why are they going to choose you instead of a fintech or a digital bank or a Bank of America? Right? Why are they going to work with you as a community bank? And so that's, I think, the why. Those things are determining the why this brand voice issue is so important, as you describe it.
And just to add on that too, like why somebody chooses you is because they relate to your brand voice, right? I mean, in overgeneralizing here, and I think I've said this on this podcast before, but like banks all have the same stuff, right? When we work with our clients, we always hear like, well, it's we have better customer service, faster decisions, those types of things. But customers don't generally know that before they come in, right? They're starting the conversation with you because of that voice, because they relate to the voice, right? Yep. Like, some customers may think, well, I want my bank to, have an old school logo because that indicates strength and they're going to be around a long time. And other ones are like, I don't want to deal with an institution like that. I want to go with the one with the friendlier font and colors because I know, they're up to speed on what I expect from services that I work with.
That's right. And those of us in the marketing industry would love to refer to Chick-fil-A, as a perfect example of that. And you bring up that and you ask about the brand, or you think about that, as a brand, there's absolutely no question about really who they are and what they stand for, and all of those things and what they're about. And oh yeah, the chicken's good too.
Yeah.
And so yeah, they've got the food to back it up. Just ask my kids and grandkids. That's their favorite. But but it's unquestionable as to what that's about. So, and Dan, before we dive into our 5 points here too, you made a great point as we were talking some about the episode today about executives.
Yeah.
And their responsibility for that. So talk about that for a moment.
Well, and for our listeners, the real gold nuggets are before we hit record. We come up with the best stuff, and then we forget most of it by the time we're in the middle of the episode. So we're going to try
I remembered this one.
Yeah. And try to remember it here. But No, we were talking about, why it's important for bank executives to focus on this, right? You might think brand voice, brand stuff, that's the marketing team, like, well, let them figure that out. But the brand voice is really, it's the kind of the outward facing culture of your bank. So, if you're running a bank or you're on the board, you'd never say, "Oh, I don't have to worry about culture." That's HR's HR's problem. You know that you have a part in kind of shaping the culture. You don't need to do 100% of the stuff end to end, but you as the leader are setting the tone. And it's the same thing with the brand. Do you as a leader want your bank to come across as friendly, come across as longstanding, rock solid institution? Like, what are those things that you want to portray? And those things, the brand voice is all about how those things flow out into the market, because you can't say the stuff directly, right? You've got to make it come out in writing, whether it's a display ad, a Facebook post, your website. All this brand voice stuff kind of flows out there. And so, yeah, my point was really just, as an exec, you need to be setting and shaping the direction of that stuff. You don't need to necessarily get into the weeds of it, but setting the direction and giving your team a structure to operate off of is super important. Otherwise, things are just going to seem scattered.
It's one of those key unwritten things in the job description for everybody in C-suite and management level and everything else. I couldn't agree more with you. Yeah. So, well, speaking of direction, so we've got kind of these 5 main point areas, Dan. So let's dive in and spend a couple of minutes on each of these. And the first of them is the simple question: who are you? And I think we've got the mentality here of kind of the elevator speech response is that, if your response is, well, we're a community bank and we do money and I bet, okay. Yeah. But here we're talking about individuality, right? And uniqueness. So thoughts there on the who are you question, Dan?
Yeah. My thought is really, it's not probably what immediately rolls off your tongue, right? Which for a lot of banks is, well, we've been around 150 years and we're serving our community. We're providing the best financial options for our customers. But yes, you are those things. But, the brand voice gets really to more of the individual, like we were saying earlier, how would you describe a friend? Somebody's like, oh, Dave, how's Dave? What kind of guy is Dave? Like that's what we're trying to get at with the who are you here? What's your unique identity? How do you do things differently?
There you go. How do you do things differently? And part of what that identity is things such as core values, and your value proposition. I know we had when we had Neil Stevens on as a guest and his president CEO role for his bank in Georgia. And one of the things that he talked about was, and I'm slightly misquoting it, but living in the halls, what's on the walls. Mm-hmm. So that's about, those core values. Well, great. Well, you can write them and stick them on the wall, and your vision and mission statement, and all of those things. And then you have to live them out. And to me, a lot of that, Dan, answers the question, who are you?
Yeah.
Right. So,
yeah. Do you, what is, and how does that, right? How does that flow to the customer conversation, right? Are you the type of bank where all the bankers are in suits and, the meetings are done in little rooms? Or are you the type where hey, we want the customer to feel comfortable, and you go to their place of business, and, and it's like working with a friend versus working with an institution. Like those are the two kind of extremes, but how do you think about your bank in those terms, right? How do you want to portray yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah. And everyone should be able to answer that uniquely, to one extent or another. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Right. And if you're the kind of the comfortable bank, you're not going to hire like a super formal, loan officer, right? Because they're not going to fit with your internal company culture. So relating back to the culture question, it's all of that. How do you? What are those criteria?
Okay. Yep. So, and then number 2 on our list is ideal audience. And I know, Dan, you and I experienced working in this industry for a long time. One of the greatest pain points for so many of our community bank clients is that our customer base is aging. We want younger audiences. That's a very common one, and many others. So around this question of ideal audience, I think it's before we figure out how to talk to them, we need to figure out who they are,
who you're talking to.
Absolutely.
Who you want to be talking to.
There you go. So, and that's right, Dan. That's the ideal part of ideal audience, right? So your business growth strategy determines a lot of that, don't you think?
Yeah. No, right. If you're trying to counter the aging customer base and you want to appeal to younger customers, you need to talk their language, right? So, if you're going after, and the biggest target we always hear about is, right, millennial first-time home buyers, right? Or in their 30s, starting in their 40s, and have some income starting to buy homes. But like, you need to talk to them like terms and conditions they can relate to, right? But you need to kind of pick one. It's not to say that you're not talking to your older customers anymore. You're not trying to also talk to Gen Z and the younger groups, but you need to have a focus and make sure that the way that your brand voice is being developed, you have a target. This is part of that kind of target and structure piece.
Yeah. I think about my agency's client, community bank client portfolio, and we have ag focused banks. So they're obviously, farmers of various sorts, farmers and landowners and hunting property owners, and all those kinds of things. And then we've got some that in more urban areas that are small business focused.
Yeah.
And, we've got one bank that's really had a lot of success niching in with manufactured home and mobile home loans, those types of things. Well, those 3 that I just described have very different ideal audiences. They might live in similar communities, but, so identifying based on who you are, what your ideal audience is a key second step in this whole process, I think, Dan.
Yeah, and it might be a couple different things too, right? I mean, if I ask 100 banks, who's your ideal audience target, like half of them are going to say, well, we have services for everybody. And you do, right? And you're not going to turn away business, but it's more about like, where does the energy, the outbound energy of your brand voice and things that you're doing go, right? Like, it might be the millennial first-time home buyer. It might also be the manufactured home buyer. It might be you might be spinning up a wealth management division and be looking for, people getting closer to retirement or something like that. You can have a couple different ones, but then the trick is like finding that voice, and that we'll talk about, in the next 3 pieces of this, how that breaks down. But if you have multiple targets, it's about finding the brand voice that can work across all of them.
Absolutely.
But you've got to find that right balance between, we appeal to everybody, and, having 300 different targets.
There you go.
But so think about, the bigger, ideal groups and how you need to talk to them.
And I think another important point to mention with this too is not only is it all those things that we've just discussed with demographics, but it's also, what's their motivation? What are they experiencing emotionally when there's opportunity to convert to business, with you? What's their emotional state? What are their pain points that you're resolving? All those pieces of ideal audience, not only specifically who are they and where do they live and what's their income level and all those demographic data elements of it and their professions, but why do business with you? What's their emotional state? What are their pain points and needs at a point of engagement? Right.
Right. And that, to use that manufactured home mobile home example, right? It's not, well, we offer loans for mobile homes. It's the next level down of that. It's not just that we offer these things, but we know that it's not easy to do. We know that here's A, B, and C. Here are the things that, you need to know about that maybe you've experienced trying to get a mobile home loan at another bank that we've solved, or we do quicker, or we do differently.
There you go.
And if you're a customer sitting out there looking for a mobile home loan, like you, that's gonna speak miles to you.
There you go. Yeah, or your example of first-time home buyers. That's probably young in their career and maybe newly married or all these other kind of things too. And that's a whole other set of ways to look at that ideal audience. So
yeah.
All right. So cool. So then the next one, the third one here is actual voice, and what that means. So kind of some thoughts around voice, Dan, communication style.
Yeah. Well, I touched on it earlier, but the way I think about it is just, a scale of super casual to super formal. And where do you kind of want to land? Where do you want to land on that? If you're super formal, there's going to be people on the probably the younger generations that are not going to relate to that. If you're too casual, you may fall out of the realm of like, well, this is way too casual for a bank. If you're using, lots of, memes and slang, you might go a little too far in the direction to say like, this seems weird for a bank. And
right. Your companies looking to fund a new hotel probably aren't going to be attracted to that.
Yeah.
Right.
But somewhere in the middle, right, is the right thing. And you've got to decide for your bank, like where that is, right? Yeah, we'll use memes, but to a limit, because they are relatable, they're funny, they'll capture attention, but we've got to define some structure around when it's okay and what types of memes are okay and which ones aren't. Just in the same way that you would say, like, hey, it's okay if you have a beer in the break room at a company sponsored party, but not at 12 o'clock in the middle of the day in front of a customer, right? Like there's, what are the kind of written and unwritten rules of your communication style, the same way that you do them for your culture or for the office itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and along with that question inside of voice, I like thinking about what emotions does it evoke?
Yeah.
So if your voice is excited about whatever cool things to add to your home and your life, with a HELOC, a new pool, a new things like that. And if you're addressing that from a business type tone that's kind of monotone or whatever, well, it doesn't really incite the emotion that you're trying to, or a new car or whatever those things are. It's what emotion are you doing? Or in my example of, looking to fund a hotel or multifamily housing or something like that, it needs to be authoritative and businesslike and all of that. So asking those questions about voice and what emotion is it inciting, can determine a lot of what your voice format is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in written and radio and social media and all of those things.
Yeah. I mean, and there it can vary slightly, right? Like the tone of a Facebook post that's not about your products or services, maybe the meme and maybe a lot more casual versus, like you're saying, one about, we can do a $30 million loan for a big property, is going to have to be a little bit different. But the two can coexist. I mean, you probably aren't doing Facebook posts about the ability to do $30 million loans. Those are, captured in a different way, but it may flow down to like, the leave behind materials that you have. Where do you want that voice to be?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, so the next one on our list, we had a hard time coming up with specific nomenclature for it. We kind of called it the everything else. But this is where, as a company, you consider other things that are important to that voice, such as the types of product and services that you offer. what are those services? The maybe geographic accessibility. Are you 15 branches across half a state? Are you multi-state, or are you a single branch? 150 million in asset, bank. Those things I think are an important part of kind of the everything else that we do need to identify inside of brand voice.
Yeah. I mean, what do you stand for, right? What is your purpose? And we've talked about that before. There's whole other books and episodes on that, but I think it relates here, right? Are you trying to be the bank that has an ATM on every corner, or are you trying to be the bank that does, like we're working with the bank right now that just opened a branch in the middle of a town where all the other banks have been moving gradually outward for years. And they said, there's a lot of businesses in this core. We want to be there. We want to truly build the community, not just, have the most ATMs.
Yeah.
And what's your where do you want the bank to go? What's your vision, not just for the bank, but for the communities that you're serving?
There you go. Your future. I was going to bring that up as well. I think that's a great point, Dan.
Yeah. And that will flow if you've defined that, if you make that part of your brand voice. I think that flows into the types of things, like, let's say you post about on Facebook, the way that you talk about your bank, the way that you relate to your customers, right? Because just in the way that, on the same way that we're talking about super casual or super formal kind of verbiage and communication style, this everything else is another way to relate to your ideal audience, right? If you've defined that ideal audience, you can think, well, millennial first-time home buyers in our town or our communities or our corner of the state, whatever it is, like, they're investing in a home, right? They care about the future of they want their property values to go up, right? Or they want their community to stay stable. We, as a community bank, we do that. Here are the ways that we do that. Here's what our vision is for not just the bank, but the community. And, you can help your ideal audience relate to that as you're putting brand stuff out in the market.
Yep. So the last one in our 5 here is kind of related to voice, but it's got a little bit of differentiation as well too, is brand tone. And tone is not just the voice, but it's the how you say it. Wouldn't you say, Dan?
Yeah. Right. So are you, think of all caps, something all caps where you're yelling at somebody versus, gentle and graceful, right? I can go back to that example I said earlier of, are you starting your communications with, like, as a 150-year-old financial institution, right, which is super formal, or are you more conversational?
There you go. Well, I like some of the ones too. And in fact, on this guideline document that we're offering to our listeners, we actually put brand tone in a chart. And to help you as listeners kind of think about, okay, well, where do I fall on the scale between in determining tone, is things like, are you creative or are you technical? Are you modern? Are you traditional? Fun versus serious. So I think it's really cool to, as executives that are in charge of the brand voice direction, is to actually go down this chart, and yeah, you've mentioned earlier in the episode about formal and informal, those types of things, go all the way down through this and scale yourself. And Dan, I think the other thing that it does too is it kind of makes you make a commitment, for who you're about to be, as far as your brand voice. So maybe as you listen to this episode today, maybe this is a little flat. Maybe your brand voice is not very defined, and you're, the local community bank. Well, okay, but let's ramp all of that up, several levels. So as you define that, so I think actually going through this practice and putting this stuff on a chart is like, well, are we modern or are we traditional?
Yeah.
For example, and again, that we've got a bunch of them on here. Neither is right nor wrong. It's just identifying who you are. It's kind of like left-handed or right-handed. Well, neither one is right or wrong, but you got to commit.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and so that was the fifth one. I'm going to make a point that sort of leads us to wrapping this all up is, if you think about like this, so this matrix, right? And if you email us, we'll tell you how. We'll send it to you. But you could rank yourself on the scale between creative and technical and formal and informal.
Mm.
You can also go rank your competitors, right? And so you could ask too, how does this brand voice help us compete better? If you go out and you understand how your competitors are doing this, you can find ways to be different, right? So you're not going to differentiate in the fact that you have checking and savings and loans, but you can differentiate in your brand tone. So if you see what your competitors are doing, you know your ideal audience, you can then say, well, what does my ideal audience really want us to be, right? If we're trying to reach the millennial first-time home buyer, where do we need to be on this brand tone matrix? And where are our competitors? And are there any gaps? Are there any places we can, spots on this matrix we can occupy that no one else is? And that's what's gonna make you feel differentiated out in the market. Yeah. That's my point. But it's not just the brand tone matrix; it's everything else we've talked about today. Part of what you're trying to do is stake in a unique claim amongst yourself and your competitors for how you're talking about yourself.
I think that's just an absolute gold nugget, Dan, with this, and we hadn't said it yet, so I'm so glad that you did.
We didn't come up with
run
it
your
before
competitors through this, and don't be just like them. Simply said. So that's an awesome thought.
Yeah, if you can't, I get asked a lot, like bank marketing is boring. Why are you doing bank marketing? To me, it's not boring because of this stuff, right? If you can't differentiate on products, maybe you can differentiate on the way you get a loan done and that type of stuff, but you can't really differentiate on checking, savings, loans. You have to differentiate on stuff that relates to marketing. You have to differentiate on brand. You have to differentiate on service, on customer experience. And this stuff, the brand voice stuff is no different. And it's one, brand voice is one of those things where you can look directly at what your competitors rather are doing. You can look at their Facebook pages, you can look at their marketing materials and see how they're defining how their brand voice is going out in the market. And you can be a little different.
Man, that's perfect. Great stuff. Dan, I know what we hoped to provide and deliver to our listeners today were some tangible takeaways, and how every single listener can go through this. And I think we've delivered that. I know in our show notes from this episode, we will have a link to contact us, and we can share this brand guidelines, and we'll also have these 5 key points, and folks can go there, check it out, and jump in and apply it. It's not rocket science. It takes intentionality, though.
Yeah. You definitely have to sit down and think about it.
Super. Well, man, this has been great. I know we love this as marketers, and the beautiful thing about the episode today is it's applicable to everybody that's, like we said, in management or executive or all of that to utilize and make a big difference. So great to visit with you about it, Dan.
Likewise. This is great.
You got it. All right, man. See you next time. I know we've got some great guests coming up, as well as we always do, and invite everyone to take a moment and subscribe, because we're always working to deliver great content for you.
Well, and on that note, I'll plug we now have a companion newsletter to the show. So called the Bank Marketing Minute. If you go to bankmarketingminute.com, you can sign up for that. But we follow up with each of the podcast episodes with little deeper, different take written content on some of this too. So we'll throw that in the show notes. But if you like this, want to read a little bit more, definitely sign up for that, and we'll send more.
Good. Thanks for throwing that in, Dan. Man, good episode. Great visit with you today. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
All right. See you next time.
See you later.
Thanks for joining us. To go deeper or get access to some of the valuable nuggets from today's show, go to bankmarketingshow.com. There you'll find episodes, links to resources, and much more. Be sure to subscribe wherever you find your podcasts, and join us next time.